I first want to say thank you guys so very, very much for choosing to come to the McLeod County Historical Museum. It's absolutely wonderful, and we love having you here, so please think about us in the future. As many of you know who are members, we are focused on World War I this year as our theme, and we're actually going to be taking a look at that for the next couple of years, because, as you know, World War I lasted a few years and a couple years, and then also it had a huge impact not only on the world but also our country and McLeod County. And we will focus this first year, we've been kind of talking about the beginnings of the war. So the war starting in Europe and the war as it developed and how we got involved, the draft, which was a huge part of World War I and affected our boys here in McLeod County, and the Red Cross and the development of that in McLeod County, which really started during World War I, and a host of other things. So first I want to, while I still have everyone's attention and you haven't got lulled into a sleep by my voice, the information that's on your table here. So there's a brochure about the museum. And of course, we would love to have each and every one of you as a member, and there's a membership form in there. That is really how we keep the lights on here at the museum, is through our annual membership. And it's just $25, and you get our newsletter, which I put some newsletters out there on the table. And you get that every single month, either email or snail mail, whichever you prefer. And we always have a lovely history portion. Of course, this year and next year, we are focusing on World War I veteran letters. We have a wonderful collection of veterans letters written home and to World War I soldiers, and we're calling the collection Soldiers Mail. And the very first one for this year that we put out is actually a Broughton boy, and it's Walter J. Peters. And this is a collection of letters that he sent home not only to his family and from his family, but also to his wifey, as he refers to her in the letters, his little wifey. And it's absolutely, they're wonderful, sentimental letters home and to their soldier. And I can't give it away because you just have to read it, but he is very important to McLeod County's history and why we picked him as the first one. So you can pick that up in our gift shop if you're interested in that. But doing World War I and all these things we do here at the museum takes a lot of research. All the posters that I'm going to be talking about today, we have to encapsulate them in that lovely plastic mylar and give them numbers and learn the history about them. And guess what that takes?
Money.
Faye, what does it take?
Money.
Volunteers! And money too, yes. It's a lot of fun here at the Hysterical Society. So please consider becoming a volunteer and definitely a member. So, okay, are you sick of my soapbox? I'll get down now. So McLeod County World War I posters. We're calling this program Patriotism, Propaganda, and the Committee on Public Information. Who's heard of the Committee on Public Information? Yeah, me either. I gotta get my clicker here. Yeah, when I got into this, well, first off, I noticed, wow, we have all these lovely posters. Aren't they just beautiful? They're artwork. They really are. They should be in an art gallery. They're beautiful. And so why? Why did they feel the need to make all of these posters? That's where the propaganda comes in. So the Committee on Public Information was a big reason why these posters were created. And thank goodness, citizens of McLeod County saved them and donated them to us. My clicker, there it worked. So, gotta give you a little background information, of course. As you know, World War I actually began in August of 1914, and that's when Europe was involved. And Woodrow Wilson, though, did not want us in the war. And he even campaigned on, for his next term, was, I kept us out of the war. So we were definitely not interested in getting involved in that mess over in Europe, and had really became neutral and kind of almost isolationists at that time period. And when you look at the newspapers, which I find really interesting, before the U.S. entered into the war, the press treats both sides, the Allies and the Germans, exactly very neutral. This is what they did at this battle. This is what happened. They don't take sides. They really are very, very neutral. So I love this picture, and we actually have whole collections of Leslie's magazines, which was a military magazine at that time period. And we all know this lovely propaganda. We want you. And I guess I have to tell you the little backstory. So they had hired all these artists, to do this. And this poor guy who created this one, he couldn't come up with anything, and he needed something. He was on a deadline, and he didn't know what to do. And he was just wrecked. He'd stayed up all night, and he looked a mess, and he looked in the mirror. He's like, that's him. He drew himself. I want you. And well, you know what? It was worth it, because that's as iconic as it gets. So anyway, from immigrant to citizen soldier. So at this time, when we finally decided to get involved, and in 1814, when Europe was involved, we were still relatively a new nation. We were also a very new nation of immigrants. From the 1840s to into the early teens, we saw some of the biggest immigration from Europe that we probably ever will see again. And so we had immigrants from all over Europe here living all across North America, because of course when they came, they spread out, the westward expansion. Manifest destiny. Our closest ally, though, were the French. And they were, of course, because we had just, not that long ago, it was still in our memory, the Revolutionary War. We weren't as buddy with the British still yet. There's still some hard feelings there. But the French did come to our aid. And so we did feel very much obligated and sympathetic to helping them. And the president actually had started kind of down low, working with the French to send supplies on some of our transport ships, which inevitably is what got us into the war. So, getting back to these lovely posters, what is a patriot? A patriot is self-sacrificing and exerts themselves to promote the well-being of their country, whose ruling passion is the love of country, those who maintain their country's freedom. Well, yes, and most people now in America, we would consider ourselves to be patriots of our country. But early on, when we had these immigrants that had just newly come, first generation Americans, their children, and patriotism was something that wasn't as set, as finite as it is today. So patriotism is the character or passion of a patriot, the love of a zealous devotion to one's country. So if you think about all these immigrants, they're from Germany, and they're from France, and they're from the Scandinavian countries, they're from all over. And what did they bring with them? Their culture, their language. That was something that was very important to them. Where did they move when they came here? Where did they live? In little pockets of Czechs and Germans and Norwegians and Danish. And they did this because they wanted to keep their culture. They came to America not because they wanted to become Americans. They came to America because they wanted religious freedom. They wanted to be able to own land. They wanted to not have to fight in someone else's war and mandatorily be a soldier like it was in Germany. Every male had to serve. They couldn't even get married until they served. So those were the reasons, not because I want to be an American. See how this might become a problem? All right, so the U.S. finally enters into World War I, and it's because of those darn German U-boats. decided, you know, they found out we were secretly kind of sending some supplies in some of these transport ships, and even with civilians on them. And with repeated sinking of U.S. ships and the loss of U.S. lives, Woodrow Wilson had to go back on his campaign promise, and he had to enter the war. So on April 6, 1917, our hand was forced, we got involved, and into World War I. So, these pictures I love. We don't have these in our collection, so that's one reason I put them on here. But you see this little gal, sometimes she's blonde, sometimes she's brunette, sometimes she's a redhead, but she's pretty similar. And she is our patriotic lady. And she wants to be able to reach out to you just like she is there. I love that one. And convince you to be patriotic, to be an American, to let your son fight for your new country. And also, by the way, could you need a food ration and buy some war bonds too? The whole 9 yards. And Wake Up America, civilization calls every man, woman, and child to do their part for World War I. So, how do you take a country, relatively in the grand scheme of, when you compare it to Europe, a new country, of immigrants all from different nationalities, and make them into a cohesive country with patriotism and zealous to give their lives and send their children off to fight for that country? Propaganda! Now do you know why that group was formed at the U.S.? Yeah, they put together that committee. So what's propaganda? I love this one is just so filled with propaganda. Where is it? It's much better in person than on my little slide. But this is a great example of propaganda. So propaganda is any association, systematic scheme, or concerted movement for the propagation of a particular practice, doctrine, idea to encourage or instill a particular attitude or response. Boy, must children die and mothers plead in vain. Look at her. Sign me up. I can't have this. And especially they usually depicted French women. Like I said, we still had a lot of French connection and loyalty to the French people. And so a lot of the women that were depicted were French women. The Committee on Public Information was formed, so we could really organize this propaganda. If we were going to, at this time, you have to remember too, prior to World War I, we didn't have much of an army. We were not prepared. We never thought we were going to be in World War I, so why on earth would we need a lot of supplies and spend a lot of money on an army when we weren't going to need it, right? So the draft became, or conscription as it was called then, became very, very important. Now we had the draft technically during the Civil War, but it was a lot different than this particular kind of draft. In that draft, you could buy your way out of it if you had enough money. You could send someone in your place to fight for you. This draft was totally new. This draft you could not get out of. Your number came up, you were going to serve. You couldn't get out of it unless you had some sort of military, like medical reason that you absolutely could not participate, or if your job at home was so detrimental to the war effort that you could stay. So that's made the draft so much more important too, that we wanted people to sign up. We didn't want a revolt from our own people for taking their sons away. And so by creating posters like this that were, this propaganda that could help sympathy for the war and for the people overseas, like our lovely lady there. They really wanted, that was the goal in this committee forming. And within that committee, after it launched its propaganda campaign, they decided to form an even smaller division of the pictorial publicity, and that's where these posters came out of. That was the pictorial publicity. You have to think, you know, in the 19-teens, there weren't a lot of ways to get information out there. We didn't have TV, we didn't have the internet, nothing went viral. Well, maybe in its own kind of way, but it didn't get out there as quickly or as fast. So you only had a few outlets, you know. It was kind of even pre-radio. Some people had radio, but it wasn't in their homes always, unless you had, you know, quite a bit of money. No television. So the printed word and artwork like this was really a mainstay of spreading information to people. Another one that was used, because at this time, movies were taking off. So you had local theaters that would have movies showing, and one of the things, they had a group that was formed that was part of this Committee on Public Information, and that committee put together what was called the 4 Minute Men. Have you ever heard of the 4 Minute Men? No, okay. Well, they had a really cool job. So back then, the movies came on these giant reels, and you had, for one movie, you usually had to switch the reel because the whole movie wouldn't fit on one. And there was 4 minutes in between that it took to switch that, so you had a little intermission. So out on the stage came the 4 Minute Men, and they would sing about patriotism, and they'd do a little skit, and then they would tell you how great it is to be an American, and boy, you should sign up for the, you know, make sure you sign up for the draft, and when you get your uniform, the girls will love you. Woo! They'll be all over you. So after this propaganda for 4 minutes, then you got to watch the rest of your movie. And so this was all, like I said, a part of this bigger overall government effort to create patriotism, to bring everyone together, and to be for the war effort. So why use propaganda? Of course, to unite a nation of immigrants, like we talked about, who maybe didn't see themselves as Americans first. They might have thought, yeah, I'm an American, but you know, I'm really German first. Because that's my culture, that's where I came from. To raise a large military force for the conscription or draft, and to foster hatred in the enemy, paint them as an evil that must be stopped. So, I love this one. Halt the Hun. And look at that poor, what is that Hun gonna do to that poor French woman and her baby? And only Americans can come and stop it. So, and then we get in, as we get further into the war, support, because this war effort took much more than just men signing up for the draft. Again, we weren't prepared for war. One of the other talks that I do is on the Red Cross. It didn't start in World War I, but it did start in McLeod County during World War I and really became well organized during World War I across America. And it has a whole history that next time, we'll talk about that one next time. But one of the things that the Red Cross was very good at doing too was organizing and using the same kind of propaganda. And they really needed to, because like I said, the military, they were unprepared, and they actually produced socks, knitting sweaters to save the government millions of dollars during World War I, and providing something that they just didn't have. When the soldiers got their uniforms, they got 2 pairs of socks. How was World War I fought? In the trenches. It was wet in the trenches. Do you think 2 socks was enough? Not even close. So just making the socks alone saved the government millions of dollars and provided something very vital to prevent trench foot. But again, I digress. That's another talk. So back to the support and sacrifice. Propaganda was used to raise funds for the war effort over and over again, using a consistent visual message over and over and over again. So this lady appears again, only now she's, you know, a Red Cross worker, or she's a YMCA or a YWCA worker. And behind her, you can see the soldiers are marching off to war, and she's reaching out to you. Help me help them. Have you answered the Red Cross Christmas roll call? So whether it's your money, your metal that you're donating, the foods that you're not eating at home, all of it to help the war effort. And my goodness, look at this beautiful young thing. She could easily be at home with her family. But if she can sacrifice and do this, my goodness, what are you doing? Pretty good, huh? Oh, and it gets better. One of the 1,000 YMCA girls in France. This is where it gets better. And we have this one. If you go have some time and you can take a little walk, we have our World War I display back there and our Red Cross display as you enter the main gallery. We have this poster up, maybe it's the other one, but this one I love. It's almost, I say, religious. Can you imagine you've seen the pictures done of Mary holding the dead body of Jesus. And there, the Red Cross worker is literally cradling a soldier who's been injured. The greatest mother in the world. So now they're playing on our sympathies and on our religion to help raise money. I have to say it's effective. And you gotta get children involved. Nothing sells stuff like kids and puppies. Or kittens. But even this little boy, who I'm sure his father is off fighting in the war, mind you, is doing his part for the war effort and for the Red Cross. And I have this one here. And targeted propaganda. So everyone and every organization in America got involved. Now, some of them may not have wanted to, but there was something else going on at this time period. There was another group besides the propaganda group that was formed. There was a loyalty group who went around from community to community, making sure that people were being loyal. And if you weren't, there were consequences for that. One really well-documented example, although there are quite a few different examples, but in McLeod County, in Brownton, there was a German man who worked for the Postal Service. And the loyalty committee came around to ask questions, as they did. They took their little surveys, and he answered their survey questions, but he failed one question. Would you allow your son to fight in the war? And he said no. He soon lost his job with the Postal Service. Come to find out later, if you do a little more research, his son was 13. That's why he claimed he said no. Or was it because he was German? So a lot of that kind of stuff happened. So if you had an organization that was maybe religious, like the Jewish Welfare Board, or even the American Library Association got involved. All of these groups wanted to show that they were for the war effort. They were patriots also, because God forbid some, bad thing befell their organization or members of their organization. They didn't want to be perceived as being un-American or unpatriotic or against the war. Yeah, I knew there was some more. So this one, the National Catholic War Council. They're all involved. They want to be out there and let people know that they are for the war effort. And this is the Halt the Hun one. Okay, so this last one you can see, I have the real thing up there, over the top for you. And so once we got further into the war effort, then it was more a matter of continuing that patriotism, making sure it didn't fall, making sure that you were still supporting the troops, and that, our support didn't waver. So you start to see more posters like this one and this one, not, giving a personal face to the soldier, making sure you knew and remembered in the front of your mind exactly what they were doing for us over there and the consequences if you didn't do your part. And a big part of that was buying bonds. And this last one, these are actually, like I said, the covers of magazines, this Leslie Illustrated magazine, which has some wonderful propaganda graphics. And this was a military poster, so it was kind of preaching to the choir a little bit. But I think they really nicely illustrate the wrap up to the war and how the propaganda continued with these graphics. So this one with the New World handing over a big bunch of cash to the Old World. After the war was over, Europe was in a shambles, and they needed to be rebuilt. And so one of the ways that happened was from the US, who actually did quite well in the war, especially prior to us entering to the war. We made a lot of money sending supplies over and selling them to Europe. And so we did have the quote-unquote collateral to lend to rebuild the old world. And then I love this one too, because the Navy became much stronger in World War I than it ever had been. It was very, very, very important. And they really were the ones that were kind of protecting, and they spanned the ocean. And the US, after World War I, before, I like to say we were kind of like a loose knit of immigrants, new country, weren't really a world player at that time. Weren't really expected to be a world player. We were the new kid on the block. But after World War I, we were a superpower. And we truly have remained that until today. And one reason why we went into, although this is supposed to be the war to end all wars, darn, I wish that would happen. But when we entered into World War II, it was on a whole new playing field. This was something that we were a lot more ready for, and I have to say we had a little bit of a swagger going in because of World War I. Yeah, we'll come over and save y'all again. And it really was this beginning of this propaganda, not just the posters, but the 4-Minute Men and all those things. And some of these images, like that first one I showed you, "We Want You," that has carried us through now today and are still just kind of burnt into the iconicness of being Americans. Like I said, this is just one of a couple different programs. Another one I talked about was back there. You can see the service flags, which is a neat display. I hope you'll check out while you're here. And that is a program that I do because the service flag actually did start in World War I and has its own really cool, unique history all the way up to today. So I thank you very much for listening to me, coming to the museum. And again, I'll just say, I hope you do consider becoming a member, because that's the only way we can do great programs like this and have the museum open.